Hi everyone, thanks for coming back for part 2. So now I want to get into some of the things that I thought were interesting about the wall of Nehemiah, and I just want to say that some people might find some of these images offensive, the images of the wall of Nehemiah or the maps of Israel. The last time I showed maps of Israel, I lost about 5 or 6 subscribers. Also lost quite a few subscribers with the videos that I did about shaking the lulav. Apparently some people were offended by the videos describing how to shake a lulav and what the lulav represents. And so there's some people who are too self-righteous for the Word of God, and so those people might be offended. And so I'll just put it on this image for now, and I'll get into that a little bit later. Okay, so what I wanted to point out first is if you go to the book of Daniel over here where it says, "Know therefore and understand from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, and to Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. If you look at the word going forth, it's this word over here, the word matzah in the Hebrew, and it means act or place of going out or going forth, issue, export, spring. It has a number of meanings, as you can see over here. It also talks about a spring of water. If you look at the definition over here, it says the promulgation of an edict, and so that seems to confirm that it's not talking about the decree. If you look at the meaning of the word promulgation, okay, it means to make known, open, declaration, publish, proclaim formally, or to put in operation a law, a decree of a court. And so it actually means to put into law. And so the decree went out in 1947, but it didn't become a law until 1948. Okay, another thing that I noticed about the Strong's number is if you add up the 161, that makes 48 in the Strong's number. It also comes from another word, that Strong's number 3318. This word also means to go forth or to go out. And so you have the number 18 over there as well. And it also comes up with 27 matches. And of course, I've talked about how the number 27 represents the year 2017, which I believe that this is truly the 2017 year, even though on the calendar it's 2018. And so again, I believe God is confirming the going forth of the decree, the year of that, and what year it ends up at with the number 18 with the number 27. But the other thing that I wanted to point out is that this also refers to a spring of water or a fountain. I've talked about the living waters and how they come up in verse 18, such as Joel 3:18, but there's a number of verses that seem to point to the year 2018. I've made videos about that before. It's also Strong's number 2018, which means to go forth, and that comes up in Genesis 2 when it talks about the Holy Spirit moving upon the face of the waters of the earth. And so I've talked about how God tells us the end from the beginning. And so I believe God is confirming the year with all of these numbers. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to point out, I had mentioned how the number 22 is a number having to do with DNA. Of course, there's 3 sets of 22 books in the Bible, and there's 22 chapters in the book of Revelation. So the entire Bible is a representation of DNA, but I also believe the chapters in the book of Revelation line up with the Passover week and the week of Sukkot, which are parallel of each other, and they run from the 15th of the month or the 14th of the month through the 22nd. And I've talked about how I believe that the years actually line up with the chapters as well. You have the fall of Babylon in chapter 18. That's also when there's the voice of the bride and the bridegroom is heard no more in Babylon. And so I believe it lines up with the years as well. And so I believe this represents the last 3 years. And the other calculation that I wanted to point out is one that was talked about by Watchman for That Great Day in this video over here that I talked about in my last video, but he also talked about how the year is confirmed by the building of the wall of okay, that's right here, Suleiman the Magnificent, and that wall was built in 1535 BC and 1538 BC. So again, you have 3 years right here, but I did the calculation just to verify it, and you see I just used today's date, and you see 1535 to 2018 is exactly 483 years, but you have 3 years that are involved here in the building of the wall, and of course there's the 3.5 years of tribulation, which I believe could account for these 3 years right here from 2018 to 2022 would be 3.5 years. Okay, and so now I want to talk about the wall of Nehemiah and what the wall represents. I've shown before how the Strong's number for the word wall. Okay, I'll go ahead and show you an image of that, and it's interesting that I just came across this image over here, because the other thing that I wanted to point out is that God uses the exact same terminology when Joshua crossed the Jordan and the Jordan River was parted. Okay, you see that over here. It says God said the Jordan River would stand up. The priests will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of the water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall. That's in Joshua 3:13. And then in Exodus 14:22 it says, God made the water of the Red Sea stand up. The Israelites went into the middle of the sea on dry land, and their waters formed a wall to them on their right hand and on their left hand. And then in the book of Revelation, the Euphrates River is dried up so that the kings of the east may cross, and it's also where the 4 angels are loosed. And so I've talked about how this is all an illustration of DNA, and I can talk a little bit more about that later. It also talks about the parting of the Red Sea in Psalm 78 verse 13, which I thought was interesting. I wonder if that's pointing to this year as well, but over here it says he divided the sea and led them through. He made the water stand firm like a wall. So again, you have the water standing up like a wall and the sea being parted and the dry ground appearing, and that comes up in Psalm 78. And it also comes up in Psalms 66 verse 6. Of course, Satan copies everything. He has his own plans with the DNA, but God has his plans, which are good, and Satan's plans, of course, are evil. But over here it says he turned the sea into dry land. They went through the flood on foot. There did we rejoice in him. And so I believe this number is a number representing DNA. I've talked about that before. And so there's going to be the good transformation, which is through Christ. And then, of course, there's the evil transformation of the Antichrist. Okay, and so I've talked about how the walls came down in Joshua 6 when the trumpets were blown after 6 days, and then on the 7th day the walls came down. You can see a depiction here of Jericho and the Israelites crossing the Jordan. So this happened right after crossing the Jordan. They crossed the Jordan in chapters 3 and 4, and this is talked about in chapters 5 and 6. There's some interesting things that happen in chapter 5 before the walls came down in chapter 6. But I was looking at some of these images of the walls of Jericho, and I might have seen some of these images before and didn't really pay attention to it. Just like all the images of the maps of Israel, they don't really mean much unless you really understand the scriptures. That's why I think no one in probably the history of the world has really understood what some of these images represent, even though they're so obvious. When you do understand what they represent. Okay, and I'm not sure if these are the best images right here, but what I noticed is that these images of the Wall of Jericho actually look very similar to the very first images that I saw of the city of David. Okay, and the very first images that I saw of the city of David were these images right here. It was when I was going over the book of Ruth, and I was talking about what happened on the threshing floor. And what I wanted to do was just to verify where the threshing floor is located, that it's located on the Temple Mount. I just wanted to be sure. And so I knew that David had purchased the land, and at the time I hadn't even seen these other images. I was able to understand what the city of David represented, and it confirmed what my understanding was of the book of Ruth and what I was explaining just from this image right here in particular. When I saw this image, I understood what it represents. It was before I knew anything about Hezekiah's tunnel or anything else. And I think at the end of that video, that's actually all I showed. And so that's all that was really necessary to understand. Once you know the story, that's all that was necessary to understand about the images. Okay, and so that looks very similar to the images of the Wall of Jericho, the city of Jericho, where the walls came down when Joshua blew the trumpets, or the Israelites camped around or marched around the city, and then the walls came down. Okay, and also want to point out that the city of David was also the original Mount Zion. It was known as Zion, and it was first named Jebus. Let me just put in Jebus. Like I said, I don't have all the images pulled up, so I'm just trying to, I have them all bookmarked, but it's easier just to pull them up from scratch than it is to find the bookmarks. But David had named the city Jebus originally, and that was the original Mount Zion, was this part of the entire complex of the Temple Mount, is the city of David. Okay, and I'll just pull it up this way. So when I had said some time ago, when I was showing all the images of Jerusalem or Israel, and how it progressed with the conquest of Joshua, and then eventually of the taking over of the city of David under David, and then eventually the image under King David and King Solomon. And I'll show those images again, but I had said that this was the smallest image over here, but I didn't realize at the time that there's an even smaller image, and that would be the image over here of the walls of Jericho, which were first taken over by Joshua. And so that's how it all began, under the leadership of Joshua. And then you have the conquests of Joshua that you can see from this map over here, which went up to the Sea of Galilee. Of course, Jericho is located right here, right by Gilgal, which means the same thing as Galilee. It means circuit, or coming full circle. And so you have the larger image over here. And then eventually you have this larger image, which is the entire empire under the reigns of King David and King Solomon, that went all the way up to the Euphrates River, which was what was promised to Joshua in chapter 1. Of course, Joshua's conquest only went up to here, to the Waters of Morom, where he defeated a confederacy. And then over here at the walls of Jericho is where it began, where the walls came down when he defeated the city of Jericho and that confederacy over there. There's also a confederacy that's talked about in 2 Kings chapter 18, which makes 2018, and Isaiah 7, where you have Revelation 12 sign in verse 14, which makes 777. There was also a confederacy that went against Israel that were defeated at the Fuller's Field over here. And so this is all a type and shadow of the ultimate defeat that's going to happen in the Battle of Armageddon, where it talks about the army that's released, the 4 angels that are released at the great river Euphrates. But I'm running out of time in this video, and I really want to talk more about the walls of Nehemiah and the decree to rebuild the walls, which actually comes up in Nehemiah verses 17 and 18, which makes 2017-2018. But I'm running out of time, so I'll have to continue with more in the next video. Thanks for watching.